Life is lived on a sapphire edge, sharp and beautiful, where one single choice can change the course of your destiny forever. Experience the intense cinematic drama of those who dared to walk the line between greatness and total disaster. Subscribe now and stay on the edge with us.
I didn't make a sound. Not when she said it. Not when the room went quiet. Not even when I felt every set of eyes in that banquet hall turned toward me like I was the one who had done something wrong. I just looked at her, and I smiled. That part seemed to unsettle her more than anything else could have. Before I go any further, I want you to understand something about me. I am 63 years old. I have worked with my hands since I was 14. I built my life the way my father taught me, slowly, carefully, with no shortcuts and no excuses. I am not a man who raises his voice. I am not a man who makes scenes. My father used to say that the loudest person in the room is almost never the most powerful one, and I have carried those words with me for nearly 50 years. I believed them then. After everything that happened at my son's 40th birthday party, I believe them even more now. Let me tell you about the bakery first, because you cannot understand any of what happened without understanding what that place meant to our family. My father opened Henderson's on Maple Street in 1971. He had immigrated from a small town in Ohio farm country, carrying nothing but a recipe book that had belonged to his own mother, and a stubbornness that I later inherited in full. The bakery was not much to look at in those early years. A narrow storefront, 2 ovens, a display case that fogged up in winter and stuck in summer. But my father woke up at 3 in the morning every single day of his adult life to make sure that when the people of Clarksburg, West Virginia opened their front doors, the smell of fresh bread was already in the air. I grew up behind that counter. I learned to read sitting on a flour sack in the back room while my mother shaped loaves. I did homework at the little table by the window while my father chatted with customers whose names he knew, whose children's names he knew, whose troubles he asked about with genuine interest every single time they walked through the door. Henderson's was not just a business. It was the kind of place that people remembered their whole lives. The kind of place you brought your kids to on Saturday mornings and then 20 years later brought their kids. When my father's knees gave out in 2004, I took over. My wife and I had been running most of the operations already for years, so the transition was smooth. We kept the original recipes. We kept the hours. We kept the name, even though my father cried a little when I told him we weren't changing it. He said, "Boy, it's your bakery now. You can call it whatever you want." I told him it would always be his bakery. He passed away 3 years later, and I am grateful every day that he knew I meant it. My son grew up the same way I did behind the counter, on flour sacks, doing homework at the window table. He had his grandfather's gift for conversation and his grandmother's instinct for when bread was exactly right. By the time he was in high school, he could manage a Saturday rush without me even being in the building. I always assumed, without ever saying it out loud, that he would take Henderson's the way I had taken it from my father. That it would continue. That whatever came next, the bakery would be part of it. I should tell you about my daughter-in-law. My son met her at a conference in Charleston about 8 years ago. She worked in finance, or said she did. I was never entirely clear on the details, and when I asked questions, she had a way of giving answers that used a lot of words without actually containing any information. She was attractive and confident, and she laughed at the right moments, and she had my son looking at her the way a man only looks at a woman when he has already decided, somewhere below conscious thought, that she is the one. I wanted to like her. I tried. My wife, God rest her soul, was more naturally charitable than I am, and she welcomed my daughter-in-law with open arms from the very beginning. She made her feel at home at Sunday dinners. She taught her the brioche recipe, which she had never taught anyone outside the family. She gave her the kind of warmth that my wife gave everyone she loved, unconditionally and without reservation. My daughter-in-law accepted all of it. She was gracious at the surface. She said thank you and she smiled and she brought wine to dinners. But there was something underneath all of that which I could not quite name. A calculation. A way of looking at the bakery, at the building, at the equipment, at the books when she thought I wasn't watching her watch them that made me uneasy, in a way I couldn't explain to anyone without sounding like a paranoid old man. I didn't say anything. My son was happy. My wife was happy. I told myself I was being unfair. My wife died 18 months ago. Cancer, fast and merciless. She was gone in 4 months from diagnosis. My son held my hand at the funeral and wept and told me that he didn't know how any of us were going to get through it, and I believed him. I believe he meant it. Grief does strange things, though. It creates space, and sometimes the wrong things fill that space. In the months after my wife's death, my daughter-in-law began spending more time at the bakery. She said she wanted to help. She said she was worried about me managing alone. She started asking to look at the accounts. Said she had ideas about modernizing the revenue streams. Said Henderson's had untapped equity potential, her words, and they sat in my stomach like cold stones. I let her look at the accounts once, in October. I didn't let her look again after that. There were other things. Small things. Individually. The kind of things that, if you mentioned them to anyone, they would tell you that you were being sensitive. She suggested gently that maybe it was time to think about what happened to the property after I retired. She mentioned, casually, that she and my son had talked about the future of the business. She asked me once, over dinner at their house, whether I had updated my will since my wife passed. I told her I had an attorney and that everything was in order, and she smiled and said, of course, of course. She was only asking because she cared. I started keeping notes. Dates, times, what was said. I am an old man, and people underestimate old men. But I have been running a business for 30 years, and I know what due diligence looks like. The party was my son's idea. He wanted to celebrate turning 40, a milestone, he said. The real beginning of adulthood. He wanted a proper event. He rented the private room at the Riverside Inn, which holds about 80 people. And my daughter-in-law handled the planning because she insisted on it. I offered to help. She said she had it covered. Looking back, I understand why she wanted control of the guest list and the seating chart. The night was a Friday in late March. The room was filled with my son's friends, his colleagues, some family cousins, my brother and his wife who had driven from Pittsburgh, my son's old college roommate who flew in from Denver. There was a band. There was an open bar. There were centerpieces that must have cost more than we charged for bread in an entire week, which I thought about and then decided not to think about anymore. I sat at the family table near the front. My daughter-in-law had seated me there. I sat between my brother and my son's college roommate, and I was having a genuinely good time. My son looked happy. He came and hugged me twice before dinner and told me he was glad I was there. And both times he said it, I could see he meant it. Whatever had been pulling at me for months eased, just a little. I thought, maybe I had been wrong. Maybe the grieving had made me suspicious and small. Maybe the evening would be exactly what it appeared to be. Dinner ended. The cake came out. My son blew out the candles and looked embarrassed and grateful and young. The way men his age do at moments like that, when they are briefly not yet what they are becoming. People applauded. The band started up again softly. Then my daughter-in-law stood up. She tapped her glass. She had clearly been drinking, though not enough to excuse what came next. She thanked everyone for coming. She talked about how much the last 8 years had meant to her. She talked about my son, his kindness, his patience, his ambition. She talked about the future they were building together. And then she turned to me. She said, with the whole room watching, that she and my son had been discussing something very important. She said that Henderson's Bakery had been a foundation for our family for 50 years and that they wanted to honor that legacy by taking it to the next level. She said they had investors interested. She said the Maple Street location alone was worth more as commercial real estate than anyone had fully realized. She said that the responsible thing, the loving thing, the thing that would truly honor my wife's memory, was for me to sign the business over to them now, while I was still alive to see what it became. She said, "We've had the paperwork drawn up. It's ready tonight if you'd like to do this as a family." She reached into the clutch bag on the back of her chair and placed a folded document on the table in front of me. 80 people were looking at me. My brother had gone very still beside me. My son's college roommate, who I had known since the boys were 20, put his fork down. I looked at my son. He was not looking at me. He was looking at the tablecloth. I looked at my daughter-in-law. She was smiling the way people smile when they believe they have already won. Confident, expectant, a little triumphant. She had timed it perfectly. She thought the emotions of the evening, the alcohol, the audience, the paperwork already drafted and sitting right there in front of me. She had calculated that an old man, soft with grief and sentiment and the warmth of a good party, would not make a scene in front of 80 people. She had miscalculated. I did not touch the document. I did not raise my voice. I folded my hands on the table the way my father used to fold his hands when he was about to say something he had thought about carefully, and I said, clearly enough for the people nearby to hear without me needing to project, "No. And I want you to think very carefully before you say anything else tonight." The smile didn't leave her face, but something behind it shifted. She said, "Dad, she called me Dad when she wanted something. This is not the place to be stubborn. We have your best interests in mind. The bakery is too much for one person to manage." I said, "I have managed it for 30 years, and I will continue to manage it for as long as I choose." She said the words I had been waiting without knowing it to hear her say out loud in front of witnesses. She said, "You don't have a choice. We've already been in contact with the county assessor's office about the property valuation. If you won't do this voluntarily, we can pursue other options. Think about what that would mean for the family name." There it was. 80 people heard that. My brother heard it. My son's college roommate heard it. 3 of my son's co-workers heard it. My son, finally, raised his head and looked at his wife with an expression I had not seen on his face before. A kind of slow, dawning recognition, the look of a man who is watching 2 different pictures of his life overlap and realizing they do not match. I stood up. I straightened my jacket. I picked up the document she had placed in front of me, and I folded it once, neatly, and handed it back to her without a word. I took my phone from my inside pocket. I looked at her one more time. I said, "I hope you enjoy the rest of the party." Then I walked out. The lobby of the Riverside Inn has a bench near the window that looks out over the parking lot. I sat there. I called my attorney. He is 71 years old, and I have known him since we were both young men making our way in this town. And when he answered, he could tell from my voice that I was not calling to chat. I told him what had happened. I told him about the paperwork, about the contact with the assessor's office, about the months of pressure and documentation I had been keeping. I told him about the accounts she had accessed in October. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I'll make some calls in the morning. Don't sign anything. Don't respond to anything in writing without me." "And I'm sorry, friend." I said, "Don't be sorry yet." "I'm not." I sat on that bench for about 20 minutes. The parking lot was quiet. Somewhere behind me, through the closed double doors, I could hear the muffled sound of the band starting up again, which struck me as both strange and appropriate. Life is not always good at reading the room. My son found me there. He sat down beside me without saying anything at first. He is built the way I was built at 40 broad through the shoulders, starting to carry a little weight he didn't have at 30. He had his grandfather's hands. I noticed that. Looking at him sitting on the bench beside me, my father's hands, reappearing 50 years later at the end of my son's arms. He said, "Dad, I didn't know she was going to do that." I said, "I know." He said, "I knew she wanted to talk to you about the bakery. I thought it was going to be a conversation." "Not," he stopped. "Not that." I said, "She had paperwork, son. That is not something that happens without preparation. That is not a conversation. That is a strategy." He was quiet for a long moment. I could see him working through it. I have watched my son think since he was a small boy. He has always been a deliberate thinker, someone who needed time to process before he could respond, and I had always loved that about him, even when it was frustrating. I waited. He said, "How long has this been going on?" I said, "What do you remember about October?" "About the accounts?" I watched the answer arrive on his face. I reached into my jacket and took out my phone and showed him the notes I had been keeping. Dates. Conversations. The question about my will at dinner. The phrase untapped equity potential, and when she had said it and who else had been present, the contact with the assessor's office I had received a letter about that. A routine notification that I now understood in a completely different way. He read it all. He read it twice. Then he put his head in his hands. I put my hand on his back the way I had when he was small and something had gone wrong at school, or a friend had been unkind, or the world had simply been more than a boy could carry that particular day. He is 40 years old and he is my son, and neither of those things cancels the other one out. He said, "What do I do?" I said, "That's not a question I can answer for you, but I want you to know something. Henderson's is mine, and it will remain mine for as long as I am alive and capable of running it. After that, it belongs to you. That has always been true, and it has never been in question. Not because of paperwork, and not because anyone pressured me, but because you are my son and your grandfather's grandson, and this is what we do." He said, "I love you, Dad." I said, "I know that too." We sat there for a while longer without talking. The parking lot was still quiet. Inside, the band was playing something slow and unfamiliar. In the weeks that followed, things moved quickly in the way that things move when an attorney who has practiced law for 40 years decides that a matter requires his full attention. My attorney contacted the county assessor's office and determined that my daughter-in-law had initiated an inquiry into the property valuation under what appeared to be a misrepresentation of her authority in relation to the property valuation. A state she had implied, in writing, that she was acting on my behalf. He also discovered that she had approached 2 commercial real estate firms in Charleston about the Maple Street property, without my knowledge, and that in at least one of those conversations, she had represented herself as having signature authority over the business. She did not have signature authority over the business. She had never had signature authority over anything connected to Henderson's. The accounts she had accessed in October had been accessed using my son's login credentials, which he had given her for reasons I did not ask about, and he did not offer to explain. My attorney used a word in our conversation that I had been careful not to use myself, even in my private notes, because I had learned long ago that words have weight and ought to be placed precisely. The word was fraud. My son moved out of their house 2 days after the party. He stayed with my brother for a week and then found an apartment. He called me every day during those first weeks, sometimes just to talk about nothing, about the bakery or the weather or a movie he had seen, and I understood that what he was really doing was making sure I was still there. I was still there. I answered every time. My daughter-in-law's attorney sent a letter to my attorney, suggesting that what had happened at the party was a misunderstanding, an enthusiastic presentation of a genuine financial proposal, and that the family would be best served by a calm and private discussion about Henderson's future. My attorney responded in the thorough and systematic way that he responds to things he finds professionally offensive, and I will leave it at that. She did not send another letter. The divorce was not my decision to weigh in on, and I did not weigh in on it. I told my son once when he asked me directly whether I thought he should go through with it, that I thought he should do whatever allowed him to look at himself clearly in the mirror every morning for the rest of his life, and that I would support him either way. He looked at me for a long time when I said that. Then he nodded. He was back at the bakery by April. Not running things, I am still running things. I want to be clear about that, because there is a difference between including someone and handing over the keys, and I now think about that difference more carefully than I used to. But he was there. He relearned how to shape the sourdough loaves the right way. He started taking the 3 a.m. mornings again, the way he had as a teenager, and I noticed that he did it without complaining, which told me something important about where his head was. There is a photograph on the wall behind the display case. It has been there my entire life. My father, young and dark-haired, standing in front of the original storefront on Maple Street. He is holding a loaf of bread and squinting into the sun and smiling the smile of someone who has no idea yet what is coming but has decided, somewhere below conscious thought, that they are ready for it anyway. I have looked at that photograph every day for 40 years. I have had conversations with it in my head, the way you do with people you loved who are no longer there to answer. I looked at it one morning in May, about 6 weeks after the party, While my son was in the back shaping the morning's first round of loaves, I could hear him moving back there. The familiar sounds, the slap of dough on the board, the creak of the old shelving, the low sound he makes when he is concentrating, the same sound he made as a child doing his homework at the window table. I thought about my father. I thought about what he had built and what he had asked of me in building it, which was not anything formal or dramatic but simply to be worthy of it, to keep showing up, to put the bread in the oven at the right time, and to know, without anyone having to tell you, when it was done. I thought about the evening at the Riverside Inn, the document on the table, my daughter-in-law's smile. The moment I stood up and straightened my jacket and handed the papers back to her and walked out into the quiet lobby with nothing but my phone and my father's voice in the back of my head, telling me that the loudest person in the room is almost never the most powerful one. I thought, he was right. He was right about that, and about most things. And I miss him every day, and I hope that somewhere he knows that his bakery is still standing and that his grandson is in the back room at 5 o'clock in the morning, making the same bread that fed this town for 50 years. I put my coffee down, and I walked to the back, and I stood in the doorway, and I watched my son work for a moment without him knowing I was there. He had flour on his forearms. His hands moved the way our hands move, my hands, my father's hands, the hands that learned this from the same source and carry it the same way. He looked up and saw me and said, "Morning." I said, "Morning. You shaped the last batch a little tight." He said, "I know. I was going to adjust." I said, "Good," and I went back to open the front door for the day. I want to say one more thing, and then I am done. People ask me sometimes, though not as many people know the full story as you might expect, because small towns are better at keeping secrets than they are given credit for. They ask me whether I am angry, whether I feel, looking back, that I should have done something differently, whether I regret not confronting my daughter-in-law sooner, not saying something harder at the party, not letting myself be louder in some way that might have felt more satisfying in the moment. I don't regret any of it. Not the silence, not the smile, not the walk to the lobby bench, not the phone call. I regret that my son went through pain. I regret the months of quiet worry and the time before the party, the notes I kept, the way I had to watch my own family, with a kind of guarded attention that does not come naturally to me and that I would not choose. I regret that my wife was not there to see how it resolved, though I think she would have found the ending exactly right. She had a talent for that, for recognizing when a story ended the way it was supposed to. But angry? No. Anger would have required me to give my daughter-in-law something I was not willing to give her. Anger would have made me the loud person in the room. I am a man who wakes up at 3 in the morning. I shape bread. I open the door. I smile at people who have been coming to this counter since before their children were born. I know when things are right, and I know when they are not. And when they are not, I fix them. That is all I have ever been. That is enough. Henderson's on Maple Street opens at 6 a.m. Monday through Saturday. If you come on a Thursday, we have the sourdough. My son makes it now. It is very good. It tastes, I think, the way all the best things taste, like patience, like work, like something that was always going to last.